Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qi. Coming up in this edition, South Korea's anti-corruption agency has requested that the police take over the efforts to detain impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol. The Israeli military has ramped up airstrikes on Gaza amid revived negotiations in Doha on halting a 15-month conflict. And Washington, D.C. is preparing to host a series of high-profile political events this month, including the inauguration of Donald Trump. We begin in Asia. South Korea's anti-corruption investigative agency is now asking the police to take over the efforts to detain impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol. This comes after investigators failed to secure his arrest following a standoff with the Presidential Security Service last week. The Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials is also seeking the extension of the arrest warrant against Yoon, which is about to expire. But the police say the document sent by the CIA regarding the transfer of the arrest warrant's execution contained legal flaws, making it difficult for them to comply with. Yoon is facing a second arrest attempt after the first one failed on Friday. His lawyer says the arrest warrant was illegal and he will file a complaint seeking an investigation into the CIO chief. Yoon's supporters have protested against the warrant outside the presidential residence over the weekend. Jack Barton reports from Seoul.
A Seoul court has dismissed an injunction filed by lawyers representing President Yoon Suk-yeol, who is himself a former chief prosecutor, well-versed in the law. Yoon's residence is inside a defense ministry compound, and his legal team had argued the warrants were invalid because the law prohibits police search or arrest in restricted military and security areas. The dismissal follows a failed attempt to arrest Yoon and search his home on Thursday, which involved a 5.5-hour standoff between police and the president's guards. The road to the residence has been obstructed for days by thousands of pro-Yoon supporters who have at times breached the security perimeter. Anti-Yoon demonstrations have also been carried out nearby. Another attempt to execute the warrants is expected before they expire on Monday. Officers of the Corruption Investigation Office for senior officials are seeking to detain and question Yoon as part of a criminal investigation into the martial law declaration. But Yoon's fate is also tied to the country's constitutional court, which has 180 days to rule on whether his impeachment by a majority in the National Assembly should be upheld. If the court upholds the decision, Yoon will be officially stripped of the presidency, which he still holds, though his powers have been suspended. On Sunday, Yoon's lawyers said the president will testify at his impeachment trial, indicating he may attend for the first day of the official hearings, which is scheduled to take place on January 14. Yoon insists he declared martial law to protect the country from anti-state forces sympathetic to the DPRK, though it has since become clear that his motivation had more to do with being a lame duck president, unable to push legislation through a National Assembly controlled by a large opposition party majority.
That was Jack Barton in South Korea. Still in Asia, Chinese health authorities are urging the public to take precautions against respiratory infections as many major cities are entering the peak flu season. Feng Yilei has details.
Recent data from the Chinese CDC covering December 23rd to the 29th, 2024 shows an upward trend in respiratory infections nationwide. The data indicates that the primary pathogens detected in inpatient and emergency departments include influenza, human metapneumovirus, and rhinovirus. While various pathogens contribute to these infections, the positivity rate for influenza viruses is rapidly increasing. Could you elaborate on the primary pathogens involved?
We are in a peak period for pediatric respiratory infections, primarily caused by viruses and Mycoplasma pneumonia. The main virus remains the influenza virus. Most pediatric flu cases are acute and self-limiting, with fevers lasting about 2 to 3 days and overall recovery within a week.
Experts say the results reveal regional and age-related disparities. In particular, The positivity rate of respiratory syncytial virus in cases aged 0 to 4 and the positivity rate of human metapneumovirus in cases aged 14 and below have shown a fluctuating upward trend, and there's a more pronounced increase in northern provinces. With over 99% of influenza cases identified as the H1N1 subtype, the demand for antiviral medications have also surged.
Treatment for children focuses on antiviral medications and symptom relief. It's crucial to start antiviral treatment within 48 hours of diagnosis to aid recovery. Antibiotics are ineffective against the flu and should not be used without medical guidance.
Chinese health officials also stress that preventative measures, including good personal hygiene and avoiding close contact with infected individuals, remain crucial in controlling the spread of the viruses.
That was Fang Yilei reporting. Turning to the Middle East, the Israeli military has ramped up airstrikes on Gaza amid revived negotiations in Doha aimed at halting a 15-month conflict. Medics in the Strip say intensified Israeli bombing killed over 100 people over the weekend. The Israeli military says it killed dozens of Hamas militants. Ceasefire efforts continue in Doha, with Hamas saying it is ready to free 34 hostages in the first phase of a potential deal with Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office says Hamas has not provided a name list of Israeli hostages to be released. Rami Amagari has the latest from Gaza.
What is happening on the ground, the latest new fresh ground Israeli airstrike on a home in the Nusayrat refugee camp in central Gaza Strip, in which 5 people were killed during or in this airstrike that Israeli army launched against the Nusayrat refugee camp. Another strike that is a fresh new ground strike hit a person in the Al Musadar village in central Gaza Strip. This comes following a number of strikes, Israeli airstrikes on different parts of the Gaza Strip. Others were hit in neighborhoods to the east of Gaza City itself. There was sort of bombardment and explosion of many homes in the Gaza City itself, in the heart of Gaza City. Let's go to the south and let's move to the north also. In the southern Gaza Strip, the Israeli army killed 4 personnel of the guards of one of the shelter camps that belong to Hamas. The guards belong to Hamas. The police force, task force that guards the shelter camp in southern Khan Yunis city, it's called Asda. This comes against the backdrop of repeated Israeli claims and determination that it is targeting the Hamas government, the Hamas police, and whoever affiliated with the Hamas group, the Islamist group. These developments actually come amidst talk about Israeli media reports suggest that the Israeli cabinet is going to meet with the negotiators, Israeli negotiators who came back from Doha, to give an Israeli response to some mediation efforts, recent mediation efforts by Qatar and Egypt towards reaching a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, maybe in the upcoming days, and no one can predict what will be the Israeli response, whether this will lead to a ceasefire, a true ceasefire, or to lead to resumption of Israeli actions against the Gaza Strip and particularly against the Islamist Hamas party. That's Sally for the time being from Gaza.
That was Rami Amagari in Gaza. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has warned that Israel will break the ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah if the armed group does not withdraw all forces north of the Litani River. The terms of the ceasefire mandate Hezbollah to pull its fighters and weapons north of the river by January the 26th, while Israel must fully withdraw its forces south of the Blue Line, a UN-demarcated border between Lebanon and Israel. The UN interim force in Lebanon has accused the Israel Defense Forces of destroying its property and Lebanese army infrastructure in southern Lebanon. It has called on all parties to avoid any actions that could jeopardize the cessation of hostilities. Jonathan Regev has more.
There's 3 weeks left until the end of those 60 days which were given for this ceasefire, which was signed in late November. And the question is what will happen on day number 61. We know that U.S. Envoy Amos Hochstein is set to arrive in Beirut Monday for what will possibly be his last visit as the Biden administration envoy. And Hochstein will perhaps try to see how things can be resolved. Lebanese sources are already saying that Israel is determined not to leave Lebanese area after 60 days, even telling the United States that Israel will remain in the area at least for 90 days since the beginning of the ceasefire, meaning extending the Israeli presence in southern Lebanon for another 30 days. This, according to Israel, due to the fact that the Lebanese army is not doing what it should do and dismantle Hezbollah installations. Minister of Defense Israel Katz said that Israel is committed to the ceasefire. Israel would want the ceasefire to prevail and succeed. But for that to happen, all of the Hezbollah personnel and every installation and every ammunition belonging to Hezbollah should be transferred north of the Litani River, and it should be done by the Lebanese army. This, according to the Minister of Defense, is not happening, and if it doesn't happen through the ceasefire mechanism, then Israel will enforce it by force. So, of course, we will have to wait and see what happens after those 60 days. Hezbollah officials have said that they will be patient during those 60 days, but on day 61, everything will change, and every Israeli soldier there will be seen as an occupier. 3 weeks left until the end of this ceasefire. A lot of concern. Will the visit of the American envoy change anything? We'll have to wait at least 24 more hours until we have a certain idea.
That was Jonathan Regev reporting. Moving on to North America. Washington, D.C. is preparing to host a series of high-profile political events this month. Congress is counting the electoral votes to certify President-elect Donald Trump's election win before the inauguration ceremony on the 20th. The city will also host late former President Jimmy Carter's state funeral on Thursday. Popin Putin reports from the U.S. Capitol.
Security is tight in Washington, D.C., with road closures and barricades being erected ahead of Monday's congressional proceedings, during which Vice President Kamala Harris will certify the 2024 election results, an official constitutional tradition handing over power to the next president. Taking place on January 6th, Monday's election certification will remind Americans of the events that took place on the same day 4 years ago, ahead of Joe Biden's inauguration.
And we fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Supporters of Donald Trump, riled up by the former president's repeated claims that the 2020 election had been stolen, descended on Washington, D.C. in an unprecedented and deadly attack on the Capitol. As Trump prepares to return to the White House, the nation's capital is on high security alert and preparing for a number of high-profile events this month. In reaction to the January 6th insurrection, a number of security protocols have been put in place, including the appointment of a new Capitol Police chief, beefing up the Capitol Police force, and providing riot gear for every officer, up from just 25% 4 years ago. The U.S. Capitol Police chief noted that the eyes of the world will be on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Elected officials across the country have faced a heightened threat environment in recent years, so we cannot take any chances when it comes to protecting the members of Congress. Appearing on a national TV network Sunday, Senator Amy Klobuchar underscored the readiness of officials.
We have a plan and a strategy in place. That's not to say there aren't threats all the time on members of Congress or on the Capitol. But I feel very strongly that we have made major shifts.
Following the certification of the election results Monday, Washington, D.C. is also preparing for the state funeral on Thursday of former President Jimmy Carter. Mourners have been paying their respects to Carter this weekend as his body lays in repose in his home state of Georgia. Security will be tight at a planned victory rally near the capital a day before the inauguration, and again on January 20th when President-elect Donald Trump is inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States.
That was Popin Putin in Washington. In Africa, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is on a visit to the continent until Saturday. The trip takes him to Namibia, the Republic of the Congo, Chad and Nigeria. It continues the tradition of a Chinese foreign minister visiting Africa on a first overseas trip at the start of the year for 35 consecutive years. The relationship between China and Namibia has been sound since the two countries established diplomatic ties 34 years ago. China has become Namibia's second-largest trading partner. It has also supported the Namibian people in their struggle for liberation. Nick Mundimba has more.
China and Namibia established relations on 22nd March 1990, the day after Namibia's independence. Over the years, the two sides have continued to bolster bilateral ties through a series of cooperative projects with a particular focus on areas such as infrastructure, energy, and natural resources. Bilateral trade reached $1.4 billion last year, and China accounts for about 30% of the total foreign direct investment in Namibia.
Yeah, the trade have increased over the years, especially in terms of exports. It's mostly mineral resources. As some might be aware, Namibia is rich in mineral resources, including uranium, gold, as well as, some extent, lithium. So the export is mostly in these areas. And of late, we have seen also exporting the Namibian beef to China, and then also in the areas of fisheries. But obviously, there's a need of improving these relationships. In terms of import, is mostly manufacturing items as well as technology-related items. And you also have many Chinese citizens who are doing business in Namibia in the various areas. Also, big projects in terms of road construction and so on. There are Chinese companies that are involved. In a nutshell, this is how the trade relation is currently.
Along with economic development, China has supported Namibia in its social development, bringing tangible benefits to the Namibian people. China has completed several aid projects in Namibia, including well drilling, affordable housing, children's activity centers, rural schools, youth training centers, irrigation projects, and aquaculture centers.
The fact that Namibia is collaborating with China, there are also interests that Namibia want to advance. These interests are not static. As I have explained in the 60s, it's about political relations in the fight for liberation. After independence, in Namibia, it's about development, both human development, infrastructural development, development that are intended to improve the material conditions of people. So if China is involved in Namibia, is to the extent contributing to what Namibia has identified as priority areas in the national development.
The various grant projects by the Chinese government have contributed to Namibia's efforts to combat drought and upgrade infrastructure. China and Namibia have worked together on a number of renewable energy projects, including the 50-megawatt Serim Luderitz wind power station. China was the first country to provide vaccine assistance to Namibia during the COVID-19 pandemic. Since 1996, China has sent 15 medical teams to Namibia to enhance healthcare services in the country.
That was Nick Mudimba reporting. Finally, in Europe, UK authorities have issued warnings against ice and snow for most of the country. Poor weather conditions have caused travel disruptions and power outages. Airports in England reopened on Sunday after the heavy snow forced runways to close. The National Weather Service says mounting ice and snow could lead to flooding problems. Michael Marilia reports from London.
We're in the heart of London here on Kew Bridge. We've been keeping an eye on the traffic over the last few minutes, and I have to say, cars going by really, really slowly. As it gets darker and as temperatures start to drop, there seems to be a lot of concern about the roads and how slippery it is actually getting out there. We know that in the northern parts of the country, officials are expecting, like you say, more than 20 centimeters of snow on some of the roads, and we've seen severe disruptions in areas like Barnsley, like York, and those sorts of areas that are in the northern latitudes of the UK. We've also seen some disruptions on the railway networks, particularly around Leeds. Officials issuing a warning, a do not travel warning on one route near Leeds. So that will be a concern for people in that particular area. And we've seen some airport runway closures, which have caused delays in places like Liverpool, Manchester, Bristol and Birmingham. But it's not just the snow and the ice that's a concern. Also warnings about possible flooding in 100 places around the UK, mostly in the southwest and southern parts of the country. And also 12 warnings indicating that flooding is highly likely in those places. So as that snow melts, as that ice melts, all of that is adding to the potential risks and dangers for people here in the UK.
That was Michael Marilia in London. Now, recapping the headlines before you go, South Korea's anti-corruption agency has requested that the police take over the efforts to detain impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol. The Israeli military has ramped up airstrikes on Gaza amid revived negotiations in Doha on halting the 15-month conflict. And Washington, D.C. is preparing to host a series of high-profile political events this month, including the inauguration of Donald Trump. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can also subscribe to The Beijing Hour, our one-hour podcast news magazine program. We would welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.